Broadcasting from New York City to the world, it's the G-Man Interviews.
Ukraine and pro-Russian separatists are accusing each other of attempting to break a peace agreement. It comes after Kiev's military reported the heaviest rebel artillery attack in 6 months, as well as fresh fighting. Rebels have accused government troops of increasing shelling. Ukraine's foreign minister says attacks are examples of how the Russian side, along with Donetsk and Luhansk, are trying to derail the implementation of the Minsk agreements. Monitors have described the recent escalation in separatist eastern regions as alarming. One rebel official is warning of the threat of a big war if the ceasefire crumbles. We unfortunately can see the imitation of the implementation of the Minsk agreements on the part of Kiev, he says. Unfortunately, we can see provocations. Russian President Vladimir Putin has been discussing the recent upsurge in fighting with his Security Council. It's blaming Kiev for shelling civilians as well as monitors.
Welcome. Joining me to provide an update on the latest on the crisis in Ukraine is Matthew Dubas, editor of the Ukrainian Weekly, which is distributed throughout the United States and Canada. Thank you for joining me.
Great to be back.
There are a number of significant developments taking place in your country, and I took the liberty of choosing a few topics for us to address. So I just want to present them one by one, and you can kind of give an overview, if you will, or provide more detail as to what's going on. Let's start with shelling intensifies in the eastern section of Ukraine.
The latest that we've heard is OSCE monitoring vehicles have been torched by pro-Russian rebels. There was an attack with tanks on 2 locations in eastern Ukraine. Apparently, one attack had close to 400 pro-Russian rebels. The other attack had 200. Several casualties on the Ukrainian side. Not exactly sure how many casualties on the pro-Russian side. Russian forces shelled Ukrainian positions in Stanitsia and Luhansk, Shchastia and Krimska. The ceasefire is really non-existent. It's an idea that the West is promoting, Russia is violating, and there is no clear-cut solution or long-term goal from the West what they want for Ukraine. There's a disparity between political and military clauses in the Minsk II agreements. The political clauses are being forced on Ukraine to fulfill, and the military clauses are being expected for Russia to fulfill, but Russia has no intentions of fulfilling anything because they even claim that they're not even there. The long-term strategy of the West is really non-existent. The sanctions that have been applied can override Minsk II requirements, and it'll be interesting to see if the West will step up with more sanctions on Russia rather than expecting Russia to fulfill its military clauses or agreements.
Now, this is not the first time where you told me that you felt the U.S. was at fault to a large degree for the upheaval in your country. Is there one specific reason that you would cite as why?
It's unclear from the West what their strategy is. It really is unclear. Russia's goal is for the constitutional status of the LPR, DPR, the Donetsk and Luhansk People's Republics. These are quasi-states that really have no legal foundation. There's scheduled an October election for the Russian-backed territories, and it is expected that these will be dubbed legitimate leaders of these rebel-held territories. And it'll be interesting to see how the West actually either dubs them legitimate or they're illegitimate. Ukrainian forces are not organizing these scheduled elections. It's completely being organized by the pro-Russian rebels and their proxies. The West really should clearly state to Ukraine that it wants Ukraine to remain one territory, but on the other hand, Ukraine can't afford to take responsibility for the rebel-held areas. Ukraine wants the rebel-held areas to be shoved down Moscow's throat and to have them deal with all the financial hardships just like they've done in Crimea, in Abkhazia, in Georgia there, and in South Ossetia. We see a pattern developing.
Next topic. UN seeks a tribunal on the downing of MH17. Why has the UN waited until now to implement this measure?
I believe that they waited simply for the Dutch to conclude some of their preliminary investigation. Nothing has been finalized yet, but I think that there is already sufficient evidence to point the finger at Russia. And Russia already has balked at it with its veto at the UN Security Council vote. And a lot of analysts are predicting that this will backfire on Russia simply because now the vote will probably go to the UN General Assembly, where Russia has no veto power and it has even less friends. More and more countries are either abstaining or not siding with Russia simply to distance themselves from this global pariah, I guess is a good way to put it.
Next topic. Ukraine recently placed a Russian general on its most wanted list. Why did the government decide to do this?
I think it shows their commitment to targeting individuals. Even with sanctions, a lot of individuals weren't necessarily specifically named. Now these individuals are being specifically named, and I think it sends a message to Russia's military leaders that if you decide to come to Ukraine, you're going to either be captured and pay for your war crimes. It's not going to be one of these glorious endeavors and adventures in Ukraine there. A lot of these Russian military leaders, if they do get captured, could be used as bargaining chips in negotiations with Ukrainian hostages being held by Russia. This includes Nadia Savchenko and filmmakers like Oleg Sentsov that are being illegally held by Russia. They've been kidnapped, and a lot of the international observers are calling these war crimes on Russia's part. And there is a lack of, I guess, means to prosecute Russia for its crimes. That's the biggest thing, and I think that going after these Russian military leaders who happen to be captured in Ukraine is one of the few options left for the world, really.
Well, let me ask you, do you think the Kremlin will regard this as an act of war and anger Putin enough to proceed with a full-scale invasion of Ukraine?
Everyone is concerned with preventing some sort of situation like that, but I think that even Putin can't even afford to do something like that. He's trying to avoid more sanctions, and by limiting his aggression in Ukraine, he avoids the sanctions.
The Kremlin is basically going to backtrack?
I believe that this will be simply a tit-for-tat type of going back and forth. Ukraine military personnel are being captured by pro-Russian rebels as well, so there's probably going to be some sort of prisoner exchange, and there has been ongoing prisoner exchanges, but we haven't seen anything significant because the fighting has been limited to little skirmishes here and there. I think that simply going after the military leaders is recognizing that Russia's military is directly involved in the conflict, and Putin, of course, doesn't like this, and he's going to deny everything.
The recent destruction of imported food in Russia is something that horrifies Ukrainians. You said that to me recently in an email, especially from a historical standpoint. Could you go into more detail about that?
The destruction of food in Russia is really geared towards two audiences. It's geared towards Ukrainians, and it's geared towards probably Russia's own citizens. It's not really even geared towards the West. It's basically keep the people in line. They even believe the lies that are being spouted by the Kremlin, saying that, oh, well, we don't know what kind of chemicals are in these foods. I don't know. There could be some sort of banned substance or something like that. And then that's all hogwash. The real reason is it goes back to, well, especially for Ukrainians, is what is called the Holodomor, famine genocide of 1932-33, that killed estimated millions of Ukrainians simply by using food as a weapon. We've seen how Russia has used energy as a weapon, and now food is being used as a weapon, just like it was under Stalin. The Holodomor was orchestrated with targeted grain quotas in Ukraine that denied the local population any sort of grain to sustain themselves. In the after effects, you had up to 25,000 Ukrainians dying a day in the streets. And considering that a growing segment of the Russian population lives below the poverty level, and Russia's tendency to deny that its own citizens are dying in Ukraine and in Russia due to its own policies, it is a frightening prospect to think what the Kremlin will unleash and how the West will simply watch from the sidelines. The deaths of millions unfolds before our eyes. The National Monument to the Holodomor has been installed on August 4th in Washington.
You said Washington, D.C., right?
That's correct. An official unveiling is scheduled for November 7th to the 8th. This has been under controversy as well because one of Putin's quasi-allies who is living in Austria right now, Dmitry Firtash, he donated close to $2 million for this project. Now, he's also wanted by the FBI, and Austria is not extraditing him to the United States or anything like that. He's simply avoiding prosecution. And that is one of the dark spots in this whole thing that Putin is also, I guess, smiling about.
You think Russia destroyed the food supply to protest a monument and anger Ukrainians that are well aware of the historical significance?
Sure. It has layers of terror behind what is overtly going on, and simply the destruction of food is not only targeted at Ukrainians, but, like I said, the Russian population as well, simply to keep them in line. But, yeah, you're right. Ukrainians are definitely one of the targeted audiences for Russia's destruction of food.
You said a national monument to the Holodomor was installed in Washington, D.C. last week, and an official unveiling is scheduled from November 7th to the 8th. Do you plan to attend the unveiling?
Yes, I do. I'll be there.
Now, every time you come on the show to provide an update, the situation appears to get worse and worse in Ukraine. At this point, do you have hope that diplomacy and peace will somehow prevail?
There is reason to be hopeful for Eastern Ukraine and for the rest of Ukraine as well. Putin is digging himself into a hole, and he's becoming more desperate. It's a matter of, is he willing to push the envelope, and where is he going to move next? The biggest thing that Putin needs is a distraction, and right now he's been looking for a distraction, and he's exploring this new swath of land in the Arctic. He has claimed over 500,000 acres of the Arctic shelf for Russia, and it'll be interesting to see how that will even unfold into diplomatic and political arenas. The UN will definitely put that under its scope, and we'll have to see how that goes. Everything is based on oil and gas exploration, according to Russia, but it's also simply territorial expansion. And we see that going on in Ukraine. And in the next couple of months, I think we'll know more by October even, if these elections happen to take place in eastern Ukraine. If they do not, what does that mean for the West, and how does it plan to proceed? Because we have these deadlines for Minsk II implementation, and I don't think the West has any sort of plan B besides sanctions.
I recently discovered that my audience extends to the European Union countries, which came as a total shock. I even had a few people contact me from Ukraine. Now, we've talked about your family members back home and how they could get caught up in the military conflicts. If you're comfortable with it, I'd like you to take a minute or two to say something to the members of your family in your native language who may be scared or worried about the future of their country.
Oh, wow. Okay. Okay. Від щирого серця я бажаю вам кріпості, доброго здоров'я і підкріплення вашого серця у ваші бої, як ви воюєте проти окупантів. That's pretty much it. I basically asked them to, strengthen their hearts and their resolve, and they will win their fight against the occupants.
It's always a pleasure having you on the show, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, G-Man.
Thank you for joining me, ladies and gentlemen. I greatly appreciate it. And until next time, stay cool, stay safe, and stay informed.